The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents Charitable Listening. Hey, how's everybody doing? I want to tell you a story, and there's no way to tell this story without sounding like a look how cool I am. So we'll just go ahead and acknowledge it up front. I'm pretty damn cool. I got to meet Neil deGrasse Tyson at ApostleCon many years ago. It was the first time that we'd actually met in person, and we haven't really interacted in person since then. But at the meet and greet at the end of all this, I got up to him, people were shaking his hand and getting autographs and taking pictures. And I went up to introduce myself, and I said, I want to start by apologizing because on my TV show the other day, I called you a douche. And Neil was like, well, why would you do that? And I pointed out why I felt it was deserved, but acknowledged that it may have been a little over the top because he had recently come under fire by some atheists for saying some things that seemed to be disparaging about the atheist label, that he wasn't going to identify as an atheist. And it was kind of a ducking of the atheist label. And you can go back and find the episode of the show to hear me say exactly what the issue was. But I pointed out that, in hindsight and after some new information had come to light, that I thought it might have been a bit harsh. So I wanted to at least, start our introduction by apologizing. This was around the time when Cosmos had been out, the new Cosmos with him in it. And I remember watching Cosmos and watching how they were treating religion, because it was pretty hard on religion. It was honest, but they were building up a point about religions interfering with science throughout history. And they'd been kind of straightforward and honest with it. And it was episode, 3, 4, 5, something like that. And they were talking about Islam. And I was sitting there on the couch and I was next to my wife and I was like, you watch, honey, this is going to be great, because they've been so forward and honest about all this that I thought they were building up to tell the story of the Muslim imam that basically ended the scientific dominance and intellectual dominance of the Islamic world by essentially kind of announcing that mathematics was haram or forbidden, that it was putting yourself in God's place or something. I'm not going to remember all the details of it, but I was waiting for that to come up on Cosmos so that I could get better informed about it, and then everybody would be better informed. And they stopped short of actually saying that. But at ApostleCon, when he gave up and gave his talk, which was kind of leveraging off of that Cosmos series, he included that information. And so when we were up in the VIP lounge type thing, I wanted to have a conversation with him about why that wasn't included in Cosmos, because to me it's incredibly important and it raises the issues. And I didn't know if maybe he'd been under pressure from the producers, from Anne, from whoever was going to air it, etc., that they didn't want to poke the Muslim bear. And so I started off by apologizing, and then we had this incredible interaction, which is only obliquely related to the point that I'm making today, but I have to go through it, which is why I said this has to be a look how cool I am story. And of course, hopefully you'll take that as sarcastic, because not all that cool. But he was standing there, and oddly enough, he started poking me with his finger. And Neil's a big guy, former boxer. He's also an incredibly nice guy. Even while he was poking me, and I thought perhaps he was going to poke me hard enough to leave a bruise, I couldn't help but like the guy, because he's speaking passionately about a subject, and that sort of thing inspires me. And so I pointed out, why I called him a douche, because he's like, why'd you do that? He said, well, I probably don't avoid the label for the reasons that you presume, and proceeded to start telling me the reasons that he thinks are in my head for why he's avoiding the label. And I said, no, Neil, I didn't think that. No, Neil, I didn't think that either. I didn't think that either. And he, because he was saying, I'm not doing it to avoid getting gigs or avoid the atheist community because I'm afraid of what it'll do to my career or anything like that. That's not that. And I was like, I didn't think it was. And finally, after poking me for a minute, he says, well, what did you think it was? And I said, well, I think it's about clarity, that there's confusion about the label, and there's confusion about the label even within the atheist movement. And as long as there is that confusion, you don't feel comfortable making a statement that's not going to be clear. I think that you have some of the same difficulties with a lack of clarity that I experience, which is why I don't give short answers. I give long answers to try to get to as much clarity as we can. And he said, exactly. And if everybody used the label the way you used it, I would use it too. And I said, okay, what if everybody starts using astrophysicist in a way that you disagree with it? Are you going to stop using that label? Or are you going to correct people about what you mean when you identify as an astrophysicist? And he said, well, that's a good point. And I said, and also, I don't get to determine what a Christian is or what a true Christian is, but shouldn't it be the atheists who are the ones who are determining how that label is used? Yeah, that's a good point. And I was like, and you, as a science communicating atheist with an immense platform, wouldn't it be the best course of action for you to not only use the label, but talk about how and why you use it in order to stave off some of that confusion and lack of clarity, or at least to make it clear, this is what I mean when I say I don't believe in a God. Because Neil not only doesn't believe in a God, he's actively been harsh on religion. He could be right up there with any, pick any one of the four horsemen or the new atheists or whatever label people want to put on it. He can be as forthright as any of that. He's an honest scientist. And he doesn't really pull his punches, as he's a former boxer, which is why I was worried about my bruise. And that's the point at which Neil said, well, that's a good point. You can tell the fans of your show I said it was okay to call me a douche. And so that's the story of the first time I met Neil deGrasse Tyson and how I clearly, obviously, beat him in a debate right at the beginning. No, all of that's true. That's not the reason for telling this story. And it's not the takeaway, but because I've told the story before, I wanted to include it. Neil mentioned something in this conversation, and it was about his frustration with some elements of the atheist community, because he had, some astronauts were taking off, and he had said Godspeed. And some atheists evidently lost their collective minds over the fact that their science hero, atheist dude, would dare say Godspeed, because that gives credence to religion. And that's the whole point of this story. The way we as atheists choose to interact, what we try to take away from conversations and what we inject into them doesn't just affect how religious people view us. It affects how other atheists, and maybe people who aren't using the label and aren't participating with the community, it affects how they view us as well. Language like Godspeed, yes, it ties back to something religious at some point in our history, but it has become something different. Language is something we play with. The words don't have an intrinsic meaning, they have usages, and that usage can change over time. So when we say Godspeed, nobody's seriously saying, I really hope that the God or gods bless you on your journey and make you return home safely, etc. But even if that was their hope, it's not like they're advocating for a particular religious doctrine. And certainly someone like Neil saying Godspeed, it is essentially the jargon of astronauts at this point. And him saying something like that is not a statement in favor of religion, and it's not him giving aid and comfort to religion. Now, I'm completely on board with Sam Harris when he talks about the fact that religious moderates provide a shield for religious fundamentalists. But that's because they both believe the same thing, they're pointing to the same book, and it's very difficult for them to criticize the fundamentalists, and so they are acting as a shield. Neil deGrasse Tyson saying Godspeed isn't shielding anyone, it's not propping up any religion. We do things like this all the time. When somebody says, bless you, when you sneeze, I hear atheists say that. It's a reflex. It is the thing that we say in this situation. And yes, it would be very nice if we were all mindful of the roots of those phrases, of the etymological, history of the words that we're using, and come up with something better. But also, it would be nice if we just get over our hang-ups. Because when an atheist looks at me and I sneeze and they say, bless you, quite often they'll pause and go, wow, why did I say that? Obviously, I didn't mean bless you. I think Penn Jillette has said that his family, when somebody sneezes, they say, that's funny, because it is. I don't know how, or whether or not that's going to actually catch on and become the new phrase to replace bless you. but I like it. But I'm also not that bothered by bless you because I don't assume that the person actually thinks that my sneeze created an opportunity for evil spirits to take over my body and that they are offering a blessing that God will protect me from these evil spirits. It is just what we say. And the interesting thing here is that there are other things that are, I would argue, rapidly approaching that same sort of colloquial jargon-based usage. Things like, I'll pray for you. Now, most of the time when somebody says, I'll pray for you, I'm assuming that a good chunk of them are, in fact, going to pray. And a portion of the people who say it do pray and believe that God's actually, exist and are listening for and will intervene on behalf of prayer. But I suspect that a good chunk of the people who believe that, who say, I'll pray for you, actually aren't going to pray for me. I know because I've been to church and I've hung out with people in churches, and it's more and more, even among believers, becoming something that they say rather than something they do. For now, I'll pray for you still clearly ties to a religious doctrine of an interventionist sort of prayer. But that's not necessarily what's going to happen forever. The truth is that when we come up against a frustrating circumstance where we feel completely helpless, where we don't know what to do, where we sincerely wish the best for the other person, whether they're coming on hard times or their sickness or illness or anything else, what do you say? Because you have nothing to offer and nothing to use but language to convey the fact that you care about them, you are empathetic and sorry that they're going through this, and that you genuinely hope things will change and improve. It may be the case that I'll pray for you becomes that same level of colloquialism, that same level of jargon that just everybody uses, that it falls in a category along with bless you or along with Godspeed. The thing that we need to take away from this is to listen far more charitably. Yes, there are real things to object to: religious intrusion in government, policies that are enacted on behalf of religious doctrine that serve to marginalize massive portions of the community, people whose rights are being abused, denied, people who are essentially growing up in religious communities where they're not even allowed by the people in control to exercise the rights that they do have, the rights that we take for granted. There are bits of language that we certainly should be objecting to. The intrusion of religious language into public, and by public I'm talking about governmental actions, those always are going to be objectionable. But someone saying Godspeed or bless you or maybe even I'll pray for you, especially if they're doing it sarcastically, are the things that we shouldn't worry about as much. You have to consider the context, the circumstances surrounding what's being said. And we should always strive to listen charitably, to assume that the person we're interacting with is saying things with the best intentions until such time as they demonstrate that they're not. If Neil had said Godspeed to those astronauts and some atheists had come along and given him a hard time about it, which they did, and he had replied with, maybe there is a God, and maybe this God's going to actually support them. Maybe my little uttering of Godspeed actually encourages some supernatural being to govern over their travel. Then maybe you would have something to object to. But when we're talking about just language, there are words that I don't particularly like spiritual, because I don't know what it means. It means something different to so many different people that I find it useless. When we talk about something like the soul, I don't think we have a soul. But we talk about the human spirit. Now we're speaking in metaphors. Now we're speaking in poetry. Now it's when I say, the human spirit is one of an inquiry, of an attempt to discover the world. If I'm putting forth a message like that is supposed to be inspiring and clearly is secular, and somebody comes back and says, you said human spirit. I thought you were an atheist. What's wrong with you? Why would you say human spirit? They're the one with a problem, not me. We have to do a better job of listening charitably. We have to consider intent as best we can. Now, I'm with my friends who say that intent isn't magic, except that I don't completely agree with them with the implication that intent is irrelevant. For example, intent is the difference between manslaughter and murder. Intent is the difference between assessing my character. If I step on your foot and I do it intentionally, then I'm the type of person who seeks to do you harm. If I accidentally step on your foot and I say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't intend to do that, and you say, well, intent isn't magic, all you're really saying is that me acknowledging that I regret doing it and that it was not intentional doesn't fix the damage to your foot. And you're right, it definitely does not fix the damage to your foot. But it should fix your assessment of who I am. If I stomp on your foot and never say a word, maybe I'm a monster, maybe I'm indifferent, maybe I didn't care, maybe I didn't notice. But if I actually say, I'm sorry, I didn't intend to do that, in my head, I'm not thinking this is going to fix their foot. When I say, I'm sorry, I didn't intend that, I'm not saying this will fix the damage that's done to their foot. It's not the foot that I'm apologizing to at that moment. It's the brain, it's the psyche. And what the reason for doing that is to say, hey, I'm not who you might suspect you are. And that allows us to move forward on how do we fix this damage to your foot. So you've got this guy who's an incredibly eloquent science communicator, who is undeniably an atheist in the same way that I'm an atheist, who could be a useful and productive member of the atheist community. Granted, he's busy with lots of other stuff, and he's got his focus on a bunch of stuff. But he was discouraged from using the label and identifying with it because some of us were a little knee-jerky and reflexive about just the fact that the word God was included in anything without taking anything into context. We can do better. We have to do better. We have to listen charitably. We have to consider intent. We have to consider the consequences and the circumstances that surround it, so that we don't find ourselves creating divisions where none exist. See you next time. Thanks. This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.